A story came out of UC Berkeley about 2 weeks ago from the campus student newspaper, the Daily Californian. And I want to use it to talk about something I think every K-12 educator in the country should be thinking about right now as the school year ends. But I want to start somewhere else first. Natasha Singer is a technology reporter at the New York Times who's been covering AI in schools all year. She was on the New York Times Daily Podcast this week, and she mentioned something that students told her directly during her reporting. She said that students in the front row of class could see students in the back row, Chromebooks open, pulling up Gemini or ChatGPT whenever the teacher asked a question. And when those students got called on, they read the AI answer aloud. Let's hold that image and come back to it in a minute. Hello, and welcome to another episode of AI in the Classroom Daily, a podcast helping educators make sense of AI without the hype. I'm Dan Cogan-Drew, and I use AI as a thinking partner, preparing each of these episodes, because I think the best way to talk honestly about AI in education is to work with it openly. So that image from Singer's reporting, the front row watching the back row, it's not a story about bad students. It's a story about a situation where not thinking costs you nothing as a learner, and the tool is one click away. The student in the back row isn't a different kind of person than the student in the front row. They just found a path of least resistance that the classroom design left open. So now to Berkeley. In spring 2026, the percentage of failing grades in 2 introductory computer science courses climbed well above the department's own norms. In one course, CS10, called The Beauty and Joy of Computing, more than 35% of students received failing grades. In another intro course, CS61A, just over 10% failed. In both prior spring semesters, neither course had failure rates above 10%. The department's own grading guidelines say roughly 7% of students in lower division courses should receive Ds and Fs combined. So let's be careful to characterize what we know here. This reporting comes from the Daily Californian, which is UC Berkeley's student newspaper. The professor who taught both courses told the paper that the primary driver, in his view, was a vast increase in academic dishonesty, tied to students using large language models to complete work they couldn't actually do. That's his interpretation offered to his student reporters, not the conclusion of a peer-reviewed study. And the article also names 2 other contributing factors: students arriving with weaker math preparation than in prior years and understaffed courses. So all these things are real. The AI angle is the one getting amplified in secondary coverage. So why is this a K-12 story? Well, because what the Berkeley data and the Singer anecdote show together is a question that applies at every grade level. When students are using AI to complete work they haven't actually learned to do, what happens at the moment of assessment when the AI isn't there? The front row student and the back row student both took the same exam. The Chromebook wasn't allowed in the room, and something that had been invisible all semester became visible in that moment. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let me name the dynamic more precisely, because I think it's more useful than the word cheating. There's a study I covered in an earlier episode, Wang and Zhu, published in Educational Psychology Review, where university students who used AI freely on a creative task outperformed everyone while the tool was present. When the researchers took the tool away for a subsequent unassisted task, those students' performance dropped below students who had never used AI at all. The students who thought first and used AI second outperformed both groups when working on their own. The researchers were explicit about what that meant. Doing well on a task with a tool is not the same thing as developing a capability that transfers when the tool is gone. Those are 2 different things, and they can look identical right up to the moment you test them separately. And that's what Berkeley's exam did. It separated them. So what does this mean for the 3 groups of people who regularly listen to this show? So I'd say for classroom teachers, the front row, back row scene that Natasha Singer described isn't a seating chart problem. The student can be in the front row doing the same thing. What it actually names is the gap between visible participation and actual thinking. That gap has always existed in classrooms. That is, a student can look engaged and not be. We all know what that looks like. But what AI changes is how easily and invisibly that gap can be sustained over time. It's not just on a single assignment, but across an entire semester. And the teacher's ability to read the room, to know who understands, who's lost, who's guessing, what some researchers have called with-itness, depends on discussion being genuine. When it isn't, you lose one of your most important real-time signals about what your students actually know. And that connects to something we covered in episodes 25 and 26 on cognitive surrender, the research from Shaw and Nave at the Wharton Lab, which found that people under time pressure are significantly more likely to accept AI output without scrutiny. The back row student reading an AI answer aloud isn't evaluating it, they're just transmitting it. And the class discussion in that moment becomes something closer to theater. It looks like learning, but then the exam arrives. So for instructional coaches, I think the discussion is typically evaluated in observations for energy and participation. Are students talking? Are they responding? Does the room feel alive? Questions like this. The front row, back row scene passes that evaluation. What's hard to observe is that the thinking happening in the room is the student's own. So when you're debriefing with a teacher after a lesson where AI-enabled devices are present, it's worth adding a question. that you might not have had previously in most standard observation protocols. And that question is, where in this lesson did students have to generate their own thinking, and how do you know if they didn't? It's not really a gotcha question, it's more of an instructional design question. Now, for district leaders, I think the Berkeley story is a university story, clearly, but the dynamic it names operates, I think, at every level of education. If your AI integration metrics are tracking adoption rates, engagement, time savings, they're measuring what things look like while the tool is present. But there's a gap between that and what students can do without it. And that gap is accumulating. And over time, you're going to see the results of this surface in your assessments. The question for your team, I think, is whether anything in your current evaluation framework would catch it before the assessment, or whether the exam is the first time you see it. So we should be clear-eyed about what the Berkeley data does and doesn't tell us. The professor who taught those courses may be right that AI-assisted dishonesty was the primary driver of those failure rates, or the math preparation gap, or the staffing shortage, or some combination of the three. We don't really know. But what we do know is that something students were doing during the semester didn't transfer to the exam room, and that this was different this year versus prior years. The student in the back row isn't the villain of the story. They're in an environment where performing learning and actual learning have become functionally equivalent. Tomorrow, we're going to look at domains where that gap is structurally much harder to create. That is, where the conditions of practice and the conditions of performance are the same thing, and what that tells us about how to design academic work. Because the exam shouldn't be the only place where the AI can't do it for you. It's just the most common one we've built into schools. So today, I'll leave you with a question for tomorrow. To what extent are you seeing this in your building? That is, students who appear to be participating, appear to be engaged, but they're actually offloading their engagement, in a sense, to the AI. And if you are seeing it, have you found ways to design around it? So, as always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in tomorrow's episode.